By spring 1945, the last year of World War II, Allied forces had not only liberated most of Europe, but also pushed back the German army behind its pre-war borders. Berlin, the German capital, which had stood at the heart of the Third Reich, lay in tatters under the weight of destruction wrought by years of relentless conflict. The skyline, once proud with the towering structures of the Reichstag and other monumental buildings, was now punctuated with the skeletal remains of edifices reduced to rubble. The familiar sights of bustling boulevards filled with life were replaced by streets strewn with debris, shattered glass, and the remnants of a once thriving metropolis. Buildings bore the scars of artillery bombardments, their facades marred by bullet holes and crumbled masonry. With defeat inevitable, Adolf Hitler and his inner circle had hid themselves away in an air raid shelter under the Berlin Reich Chancellery, the so-called Führerbunker. Within the thick, reinforced walls of the bunker, the air hung heavy with fear, desperation, and the pungent odor of unwashed bodies. The once imposing command center was now a squalid labyrinth of narrow corridors and cramped rooms. Its inhabitants, their faces drawn and haggard, moved about like specters, haunted by the weight of their collapsing world. Hanz Kammler, the SS general responsible for the Nazi secret weapons program, stood at the bunker's main entrance, waiting to enter. He'd been knocked up in the dead of night by the Gestapo, a chilling reminder of the authority of the Führer, even at this late stage in the war. A knot of anxiety tightened in his stomach now that he was here. After showing his ID card and credentials, Kammler made his way down the steps of the bunker and through the labyrinth of tunnels to a long corridor, leading to a small, windowless room where Hitler himself awaited him. The corridor smelled of stale sweat, cigarette smoke, and burnt lamp oil. In the ante-room close to Hitler's office, Kammler overheard Goebbels, the once powerful propaganda minister, his voice now a raspy whisper as he spoke of a last stand, of a heroic end to the Reich. A few people listened, but everyone knew that his words were meaningless, and the end was close. Various other high-ranking Nazis were in the bunker, but most of the important ones had fled, or been executed by Hitler for their failure to win the war. A knock on the steel door to Hitler's office was answered with a curt, "Come in," and Kammler was at once in the presence of the evil dictator. The Führer, a mere shadow of his former self, sat hunched over a table, his gaze lost in the flickering shadows. His once sharp features were now gaunt and haggard, his blue eyes dull and lifeless. Around him stood a grim-faced cadre of loyalists, including Hans Bauer, his personal pilot, and Heinrich Müller, the head of the Gestapo. At Hitler's command, they saluted and left the room, leaving Kammler alone with Hitler. "Kammler," Hitler mumbled weakly, his voice a mere whisper. "I'm glad you're here. You have been chosen for a secret mission. It is a matter of great importance. The fate of the Reich depends on you." The words sent a chill down Kammler's spine. "What is this mission?" His voice trembling slightly. Hitler's eyes flickered open, and a cruel smile spread across his lips. "I need you to activate the final solution." Kammler's mind raced. The final solution, the desperate plan that Hitler had devised to wreak havoc on the Allies. No one had ever dreamed that it would actually be put into operation. It was a crazy plan, but he knew that he could not refuse Hitler's orders. "I will do everything in my power to succeed, mein Führer," Kammler said. Adolf Hitler leaned forward, his badly shaking hand held out of sight behind his back, his tired eyes piercing into the depths of Hanz Kammler's soul. The air was thick with tension as Hitler delivered a directive that had the potential to weigh heavily on history. "Hans," he began in a low, trembling voice, "you have been chosen for a mission of utmost secrecy and importance. This mission must succeed at all costs, and the knowledge of its existence must remain confined to us alone. The fate of our efforts hinges on your discretion and capability." As Kammler accepted the gravity of the task, he understood that this final command was not just an assignment, but a final act of desperation in an already lost war. Kammler's pulse quickened as Hitler presented him with a large metallic briefcase. "This briefcase contains the activation key," he said. "You must deliver it to our scientists in Berchtesgaden. They will use it to continue the fight against our enemies. We cannot afford to fail." Hitler handcuffed the briefcase to Kammler's outstretched hand and then handed him a small key. Kammler nodded, understanding the stakes involved in this clandestine plan that was rooted in desperation and aimed at altering the course of history itself. A knock at the door, and an assistant entered the room holding a red velvet-covered box. Without any kind of ceremony, Kammler was hastily given a letter, a medal, and a bundle of Swiss francs. The letter, penned by Hitler himself, assured him of safe passage to South America. The medal, from the red velvet box, was the Knight's Cross of the War Merit Cross in gold, without swords, and was a token of gratitude for his loyalty and service. This award had only been awarded to 2 others before Kammler and was very rare. The Swiss francs, a substantial sum, were intended to finance Kammler's escape when he had completed his mission. As Hitler clasped the medal onto Kammler's uniform, a charged atmosphere enveloped the room. The Führer's piercing gaze bore into the general, who stood resolutely, embodying a loyalty that had become increasingly rare within the upper echelons of the Nazi hierarchy. This award not only acknowledged Kammler's contributions to the war effort, but also symbolized his unwavering commitment to the Nazi ideology, particularly in the realm of advanced weaponry. Hitler turned away and sat down in an armchair, and the meeting was over. As Kammler left the office, he and Bauer were led up the rear stairwell by Müller and out into the garden of the Reich Chancellery. A convoy awaited them, outrider motorcycles at the front, followed by a truck full of SS guards. The centerpiece was a Mercedes staff car bearing the markings indicating Wehrmacht Luftwaffe, with a flag designating the Air Force District. Kammler and Bauer climbed into the back of the staff car together, leaving Müller behind with a parting salute. No words were spoken. As the convoy drove off, Hitler, who had followed them up from the bunker, joined Müller and watched Kammler drive away. At Müller's signal, another convoy of vehicles arrived. This time, Hitler's limousine headed up the line, followed by more trucks with SS guards. Hitler called for his dog, Blondie, which scurried up the steps of the bunker and ran up to stand beside him. Müller looked intently at the Führer and saluted once more. "Good luck, mein Führer," he remarked. As Hitler got into the car, he paused for a moment and turned to a small, unnoticed, bespectacled man standing in the group with them. The man was holding a red velvet-covered box. The Knight's Cross of the War, in gold, without swords, was pinned to his chest. "I hope your device works," Hitler whispered. "So do I," the man replied nervously. The once bustling Tempelhof airfield, now a shadow of its former self, was eerily quiet. The only sounds the distant hum of shelling in the city and the rustle of the wind whistling through the bomb-damaged and dilapidated buildings. A colossal Junkers Ju-290 stood at the ready, its powerful engines warming the air with a deep, rhythmic growl. This was a massive bomber, a symbol of power and authority, its sleek, camouflaged fuselage gleaming under the dim light of the airfield lamps. The Ju-290, with its extended range of 4,200 miles and a reinforced structure, was designed for long-distance flights, its interior crammed with sophisticated equipment and luxurious amenities. This particular aircraft had been converted for VIP passengers. It was armor-plated and had an emergency escape hatch operated by a red lever. However, tonight, this aircraft was no longer a vehicle for comfort, but for a clandestine flight, for a mission shrouded in secrecy. The plane was fueled, its tanks overflowing with enough aviation fuel to traverse vast distances. Its weapon systems, a deadly array of cannons and machine guns, were primed and ready for action. The plane was prepared for a desperate flight, a last gamble in the face of imminent defeat. The aircrew, all of them hardened veterans of Luftwaffe combat, stood poised in their positions, their faces grim and determined. They were part of a desperate plan, a final act of defiance, and they were ready to carry out their orders. The aircrew were a testament to Barr's meticulous planning and unwavering commitment to success. He hadn't simply gathered a group of men for this mission. He had handpicked each individual for their unique skills and unwavering loyalty. The pilot, a veteran with years of experience in the skies, possessed an uncanny ability to navigate even the most treacherous air currents. The flight engineer, a stoic and resourceful individual, could diagnose and repair any mechanical issue with ease. The radio operator, with his quick wit and sharp ear, ensured seamless communication with base and coordinated flawlessly with the crew. The gunners, each a master of their weapon, were fiercely loyal and unwavering in their determination to defend the aircraft at all costs. Their training had been rigorous, pushing them to their limits. Together, they formed a formidable team, united by their shared purpose and bound by the unspoken faith they had in one another and the Third Reich. Kammler stood on the tarmac next to the giant aircraft, waiting impatiently. Bauer returned from the airport office, his face creased with worry as he scrutinized the weather reports, his finger tracing the predicted path of the flight on a crumpled map. There was a possibility of bad weather along the route. He double-checked the emergency supplies list, making sure everything was in place. Kammler, his usual jovial demeanor replaced with a solemn expression, excused himself for a moment. Bauer watched him walk to the airport buildings, the weight of responsibility pressing down on his shoulders. Despite the secret nature of the operation, he understood the need for Kammler to telephone his wife, to reassure her and ease her fears. In the face of such a formidable mission, even the most hardened of men craved family comfort, and being a loyal Nazi, his wife could certainly be trusted to keep quiet about his mission. Bauer shook Kammler's hand upon his return. "Good luck, Kammler. We'll be drinking wine in Argentina in a few weeks, in the sunshine with some pretty girls. We'll soon forget all of this nasty business." Kammler nodded in agreement, although he wasn't sure that anything that had happened in the last few years could ever be forgotten so quickly. As Kammler, his heart pounding, climbed the steps and stepped into the plane, he knew that he was embarking on a journey with no guarantees of safety and an uncertain future. The aircraft took off shortly after midnight, heading south towards the Alps. Radio silence was maintained for security reasons. The weather was overcast, with low clouds hiding the ground below. The pilot flew a zigzag route to avoid Allied raiders and the possibility of German air defense anti-aircraft fire, although there wasn't much activity now from the battery stations. Kammler looked down at his Rolex watch, a gift from the Führer. It was very distinctive, with SS markings on the back. Hitler had given it to him some years ago when he was appointed head of the Secret Weapons Research Facility. All that seemed so long ago now. It was 12:30. The journey would take a few hours, so he sat down, rested his head against the bulkhead of the aeroplane, and fell into a restless sleep. As the plane approached Salzburg, dawn was just breaking. Kammler awoke with a start as the pilot spotted something on the horizon and shouted out, "Bandits at 12 o'clock! Action stations!" A solitary Mustang fighter, its sleek silhouette cutting through the azure sky, had detected their presence. Its powerful engine roared to life, propelling the fighter forward with breathtaking speed as it hurtled towards its target. With each passing moment, the Mustang drew closer, its menacing presence casting an ominous shadow over the unsuspecting enemy below. Kammler rushed up to the cockpit, and he could see the enemy aircraft in the distance bearing down on them. "Get back in your seat and buckle up," shouted the captain. "This is going to be a rough ride." The Mustang's pilot, A seasoned veteran with nerves of steel and eyes like a hawk, gripped the controls with unwavering determination. His keen gaze scanned the surroundings, searching for any sign of resistance or evasion. The fighter's armament, an array of deadly cannons and rockets, was primed and ready for action. The Junkers was a sitting duck. With the precision of a skilled surgeon, the Mustang pilot maneuvered his aircraft into an optimal firing position. The Junkers was now within striking distance, and the Mustang's cannons roared into life. A deafening barrage of shells tore through the air. Rockets screamed from the fighter's undercarriage, exploding close to the Ju-290 with devastating force. Remarkably, the rockets didn't strike their target as the skilled pilot of the Ju-290 took preemptive evasive action, veering left and losing height immediately. However, it wouldn't be long before the faster, more agile aircraft would circle around and make another pass. The Ju-290's pilot, his brow slick with sweat, scanned the horizon. The mountains, their peaks shrouded in mist, offered a glimmer of hope. It was a risky gamble, but a desperate one. Flying into the mountainous terrain meant navigating treacherous, narrow valleys and risking collisions with the jagged peaks. But it was their only chance to shake off the Mustang. Its range was limited, and the farther they could get away into the mountains, the more chance that he would have to call off his attack and return to base. Unknown to them, the Mustang pilot had plenty of fuel left in his undermounted wing tanks, special editions designed for long-range activities. With a roar, the Ju-290 banked sharply to the right, its wings straining under the force. The Mustang followed, its machine guns spitting out a deadly hail of lead. From the rear gun turret, the Ju-290's tail gunners fought back with desperate courage. Their bursts of fire, though valiant, were mere flickers of light against the onslaught of the more agile Mustang. Because of the angle of attack, they couldn't elevate their guns enough to make any hits on the attacking aircraft. The Ju-290, its wings groaning under the strain, pushed onwards. It was a macabre ballet of death and desperation, a dance for survival played out against the stark backdrop of the mountains. The fate of the Ju-290 hung in the balance, teetering between the jaws of the unrelenting Mustang and the treacherous embrace of the approaching mountains. The Junkers flew up a narrow mountainous valley with no way to turn back. They tried to circle around the Untersberg mountain, but couldn't gain enough altitude, and they finally took a major hit over Obersalzberg, and one of the aircraft's starboard engines burst into flames. They quickly started to lose height down towards the lake at Königssee. The Ju-290 bucked against the wind, its nose pointing towards the sprawling mirror-like surface of the lake. Below, the water shimmered, reflecting the harsh early morning sun. Kammler, staring out of the window, felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He'd never been good with heights, but this wasn't just about the altitude. Then another engine exploded in a burst of pyrotechnics. Flames danced around the wing outside and into the fuselage. The air was thick with the smell of burning metal and fear. A shrill alarm blared, a discordant symphony to the sickening lurch of the plane. Panic clawed at Kammler's throat. His eyes darted to the emergency exit, a rectangle of hope in the flickering light. A quick glance at the pilot, his face pale, eyes wide with horror, confirmed what he already knew. Adrenaline surged through Kammler's veins, pushing aside the fear that threatened to consume him. He grabbed a parachute bag, its weight heavy and reassuring in his hands. The briefcase was clutched to his chest. The cabin was abuzz with screams and cries, but he ignored them. This was his fight, his survival. He pushed past the panicked crew members, his heart pounding against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the orchestra of fear. He pulled the red lever which opened the escape hatch, a gaping maw in the floor of the metal fuselage. He knelt down and stopped at the edge of the opening, taking a deep breath, willing himself to stay calm. The wind, a howling beast, tore at his hair, trying to pull him back inside, but he was determined. He squeezed his eyes shut, took another deep breath, and jumped down through the hole. The air snatched the breath from his lungs, a cold, unforgiving embrace. He plummeted downwards, the world dissolving into a blur of swirling clouds and distant shouts. He pulled the ripcord on his parachute, but nothing happened, the parachute not deploying. The wind caught the tattered remnants of the silken canopy, which was unfortunately riddled with bullet holes, and Kammler screamed as the ground rushed rapidly up towards him. He panicked and screamed as he fell, his arms flailing around hopelessly. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Kammler's life flashed before his eyes, his school days, his time in the army, the rocket research facilities, his time with Hitler, and then the face of his son, the small boy at home that he would never see again. The ground rushed up beneath him. He closed his eyes and screamed one last time as his body smashed down through the trees at the side of the lake, the sharp branches ripping him to pieces as he fell, and in an instant, General Hanz Kammler was no more. With a deafening roar, the Junkers plummeted from the heavens above him, its engines failing catastrophically. The aircraft finally spiraling out of control before crashing into the water with a thunderous impact. The fuselage of the plane broke into several pieces, sending debris flying through the air. Some crew members were flung from the wreckage, others were trapped in the fuselage, which quickly sank into the icy depths below. The once majestic war machine rapidly disappeared into the murky waters of the lake, leaving only a trail of bubbles to mark its watery grave. There were no survivors. A boy, barely 10 years old, had been playing in the woods, chasing after a runaway squirrel, when he saw the plane go down. There was no one else in this remote region that saw it. As he got closer to the crash site, the smell of burning metal in the air told a horrifying story. He walked alongside the lake under the trees, and he saw the body of a man, badly disfigured, slumped against a tree, half buried in the undergrowth. The man wore a military uniform. His face was contorted in a death stare. A single mangled arm handcuffed to a heavy metal case, its surface still warm from the crash. The boy, numb with shock, approached the body. He knew instinctively that this was no ordinary man. He was wearing a SS Army uniform, and he looked very important. He spotted a Rolex watch on the dead man's wrist. He paused for a moment thinking, and then carefully slipped the watch off the man's wrist. Then, using a large rock that he had found nearby, he smashed the handcuffs open and took the metal case, its weight surprising him. It seemed to pulse with an unseen energy. He then ran off into the forest. What happened to the boy and the briefcase remains a mystery to this day. Speculations abound regarding the content of that case. Was it an activation key to a weapon that could rend the very fabric of the world, or an insidious plan crafted by the twisted mind of Hitler himself? One that would resonate long after the death of the regime? Such questions swirl like the mist in the mountains, tantalizing historians and conspiracy theorists alike. Without answers, the shadows of that dark past continue to loom large, echoing the sentiment that some mysteries are forever destined to remain unsolved.